I am pleased to welcome Senator Linda Frum.
Good evening, everyone. We are so grateful to have you join us. In this difficult week, when the Jewish people face yet another painful test, we are so encouraged to see thousands of you across our incredible Toronto community gather together virtually on less than 24 hours notice. You did so because, like all of us at UJA, you wanted to do what we always do in moments like these: come together as a community, support our fellow Jews in their moment of need, and send a clear message that Toronto is for Israel now and always. We also come together to affirm that our special connection to Israel is about much more than a single event or rally. Tonight, just as we express our solidarity, we commit to the people of Israel that we will be with them as they work to recover from the terrible loss, trauma, and many devastating impacts of this crisis. We are also here to reaffirm an important truth that each of us must share with our fellow Canadians. We, as a Jewish community, like Israelis, want peace. While the issues involved in this conflict can be very complex, there's at least one thing that isn't. One party to this conflict, Israel, is a democracy that reflects the will of its people. And Israelis have demonstrated time and again that they are willing to forge peace agreements with their neighbors, so long as they have a genuine partner for peace on the other side. The other party to this conflict, Hamas, is an internationally banned terror group that both targets civilians in Israel and uses the civilian population of Gaza as human shields. Just as we are thinking of the many Israeli families that will spend tonight in a bomb shelter with their children, we are also thinking of the children of Gaza who have been shamefully put in harm's way as a direct result of Hamas' cynical and violent actions. And so, before beginning tonight's program, we will now pause for a moment of silence in recognition of all the innocent victims of this terrible conflict. Thank you. With that, I'd like to introduce Adam Minsky, President and CEO of UJA Federation of Greater Toronto.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you to everyone joining us tonight. As Linda noted, this is a time for us to be united as a community and united as a Jewish people. Our community is diverse in our viewpoints and diverse in the ways that we connect with Israel. But when Israel is under attack, which means that half the world's Jewish population is under attack, uniting behind the people of Israel must be our response. We've all been watching with growing alarm the images, videos, and stories coming out of Israel. At moments like this, what is most difficult for me personally is the feeling of powerlessness that comes with being geographically far from Israel. I know many of you feel the same way because so many of you have been asking me and the UJA team what we can do here in Toronto to help Israel. Tonight, we are not powerless, and we're here to do more than demonstrate our solidarity. We're here to launch a united, community-wide movement to show through our words and actions that Toronto is for Israel. In the coming days, we will be mobilizing the community to join us in making a difference in various ways. Tonight, we'd like to begin by asking you to take 3 key actions. First, this is a time to double down on our public pride, love, and support for Israel. Due to the pandemic, UJA's annual Walk with Israel has been modified to be a month-long experience, with community members choosing to walk one of our walk routes with their family. If you haven't signed up yet, please do so at walkwithisrael.com. It's free, and we can provide you with a Walk with Israel sign for your lawn. Let's unite, not only tonight, but for the entire month of May, and show Toronto we're proud to support Israel. Second, many community members have asked for an opportunity to provide material support to help Israelis get through this crisis. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that every dollar raised through our Walk with Israel will be dedicated to helping Israelis recover from the many terrible impacts of this crisis. And thanks to a generous and anonymous donor, every dollar you donate to the Walk will be automatically doubled up to a maximum of $500,000. I encourage everyone who is able to do so to make a gift or get involved in fundraising for this year's Walk. Third, this is a moment for our community to make our voices heard. As proud Jews and proud Canadians, we have a democratic right and responsibility, and we are uniquely positioned to explain to our fellow Canadians what's really happening in the Middle East. UJA's advocacy agent, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or CJA, is mobilizing an entire campaign to empower grassroots community members to share the truth, counter misinformation online, and call on the Canadian government to support Israel. Please join me right now in going to cja.ca/Israel under fire. Through CJA's Action Alert System, you can send a message to our elected officials in just minutes. And thousands of us speaking out together can send a strong message about where our community stands. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to introduce two important Jewish leaders who've each recorded a special message to our community. Toronto Jewish community leader Julia Koshitsky, who's in Israel, and Israeli Consul General for Toronto and Western Canada, Galit Baram.
My dearest friends, stand with Israel. Be strong. Have hope. Only when we are together will we be strong. Am Yisrael, Chai.
Dear friends, Shalom. These are hard times for the state of Israel. We've just overcome the challenge of the COVID global pandemic, and we find ourselves protecting our citizens from a wave of terrorism instigated by Hamas. This terror organization attempts to destabilize the situation in the region and cause an escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel has taken steps to restrain and de-escalate the situation for a number of weeks now. These steps have been answered by a wave of rockets and terrorism from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. More than 1,400 rockets have been launched to civilian population centers in Israel, sending millions of people, men, women, and children, to bomb shelters. Attacking Israeli civilians while using Palestinian civilians as a human shield is a war crime. It's as simple as that. And I encourage our friends in Canada to question themselves. What would you do? How would you respond if even a single rocket fell in Toronto, in Montreal, in Vancouver? We all know very well that no country would tolerate that. We will put an end to the unrest on our streets. Israel will not allow hooligans and rioters tear apart the delicate tapestry that is Israeli society. These people will be apprehended, peace and governance will be restored, and order will be reinstated. There is no place for such phenomena in our country. On days like these, Israel needs the support of the Jewish community and its many friends in Canada. You know Israel well. Many of you have been to Israel. Some of you have family and friends living there. You understand the enormous challenges that are facing us. I would like to thank you all for your love, for taking a stance in support of Israel, for genuinely caring. This is truly encouraging and heartwarming. Let us hope and pray for better days.
Thank you, Julia, and Galit, Consul General Baram, for those very powerful messages. I know our entire community is grateful for your leadership. I'd now like to introduce two leading experts from Israel. Many of you will know author and scholar Dr. Daniel Gordis of Shalem College in Jerusalem, who recorded a message for our community earlier today. Dr. Gordis will be followed by someone else you may also know, educator, guide, and author Michael Bauer, who will come to us live from Kibbutz Beit Guvrin in Israel. Michael, I'll ask you to please go ahead and address the audience immediately after Dr. Gordis's message.
Good evening. I'd like to begin by thanking you for inviting me to share a few thoughts with you today. I have many, many friends, wonderful close friends in the Jewish community of Toronto, and I know what extraordinary work the UJA Federation does. So I was particularly honored and gratified to be asked to share some thoughts with you. What I'd like to focus on really briefly this evening is two different pieces of this very complicated situation. The first is, how did we get where we are? Why did this happen now? And the second is what might seem to be a side conflict, but may actually be the main conflict, which is, of course, the conflict between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, now sadly raging across Israeli cities. But let's start with the first issue. How did we get here? Why did these hostilities begin now? A number of people actually had a vested interest in all of this happening now. After the Abraham Accords, when the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, followed by Sudan and Morocco, when there were noises about Saudi Arabia, all began to essentially say that the Israeli-Arab conflict was over, the Palestinians saw themselves being very much marginalized and sidelined by Israel, by the international community, and even by the Arab world. Hamas was becoming irrelevant in many people's minds, and it was time, as far as they thought, to prove once again that this conflict was far from over. Mahmoud Abbas, who heads the Palestinian Authority, also had a vested interest. He was elected in January 2005 for a 4-year term. So he is now in the 16th year of a 4-year term. He'd called elections for this month, for May 2021. Everybody knew that he wasn't going to hold the elections, that he would find an excuse to cancel them, which he did. But he needed a reason to take the spotlight off of his exceedingly non-democratic regime and get Arabs focused on something else. There were those on the Israeli right who were appalled by the idea that Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid would create a coalition which was dependent on the votes of Ra'am, a small Arab party, which was willing apparently to sign on to the coalition, which is big news in Israel to have an Arab party be part of the coalition. But it's a distinctly non-Zionist, essentially anti-Zionist party, and people in the Israeli right were appalled that the center and the center right, which is Naftali Bennett, would be willing to do that. And some of them, I don't think, wanted to start this conflict, but were certainly willing to stoke the flames, to test the loyalty of these Israeli Arabs to see, are they really Israelis? Or are they really more siding with the Arab community? And all we need is a little conflict to see how that goes. And some cynical people in Israel, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, think that Bibi Netanyahu, who did not do very well in the last elections and was unable to form a coalition after the 4th elections, has a vested interest in 5th elections. So some people say he thought that if he could get a small conflict going, it would make it impossible for the center-right to make a coalition deal with Ra'am. There'd be no coalition for them, no coalition for him. We'd be 4th and 5th elections, and hopefully he would do better. That's a cynical view. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's wrong. But everybody, Hamas, Abbas, Israeli right, maybe Bibi, maybe not Bibi, everybody was playing with fire. And as often tragically happens when you play with fire, things can get radically out of control. Hamas did not imagine that we would start taking out their senior commanders the way that we have been, or that our intelligence was as absolutely stunning as it has been. We know where they're meeting. We know what buildings, and we take them out while the meeting is going on. It's extraordinary how much damage we've done. But we did not expect that they would unleash the kind of volley that they have. And Iron Dome has performed quite admirably, but not flawlessly. And they've overwhelmed it in certain cases, and they fired at Jerusalem, they fired at Tel Aviv, they were firing at Dimona, they were firing at Ashdod. We have had a number of casualties, tragic deaths. They're all horrible, including Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews. So everybody has kind of reacted much more strongly than the other side imagined. And we find ourselves in a conflict which is just agonizing and feels endless, will likely go on for some time, a week, 2 weeks, who knows? It could end sooner, it could end later. That depends, of course, on whether or not Hezbollah gets into the story. But if Hezbollah gets in, that's an entirely different war. And we won't talk about that now because that's an entirely different scenario. So let's take some time and talk a little bit about what's going on across Israeli Arab cities. In Akko, in Lod, in Jerusalem, in the south, there has been exceedingly vicious violence between Israeli Arabs and Jews, including lynchings. Israeli Jews basically almost beat an Arab to death. He's alive, but he was beaten almost to death. And Israeli Arabs beat an Israeli almost to death. He is alive, but apparently in very tenuous condition. In the hospital news is a little bit difficult to get exact. The police were out in force and they declared curfews in a few cities. The curfews were violated left and right. There was discussion this morning of calling in the army. The army is opposed. Gantz, the Secretary of Defense, is opposed. But Bibi wants this quelled, and at least for right now, as I'm speaking to you several hours before your meeting, they are bringing in backups from reserves from the Border Patrol and the police, but not the army quite yet. But this is a disaster with tremendous amounts of property damage, attacks on people, attacks on synagogues, little things that look like pogroms inside Israel. It's really hard to describe how horrific it is. And it's taking place really all across the country. Now, not in every city, but in every city where there's been some semblance of coexistence for many, many decades, it's been completely blown sky high. Jews are literally afraid to come out of their homes. In other cities, Arabs are afraid to come out of their homes. This is the falling apart of the coexistence part of Israeli society on which we've prided ourselves to a certain extent, which was clearly not as deeply rooted as we had hoped or thought. Now, it's important to understand that we shouldn't be entirely surprised by the depth of emotion here and how much an Israeli war with Gaza elicits complex feelings for Israeli Arabs. Because, of course, who's an Israeli Arab and who's a Palestinian refugee, either in Gaza or on the West Bank, is very often a matter of luck. If you were an Arab in Haifa in 1947-48 as the state's being created, and you decided to flee the fighting, and you were one of the lucky ones, and your car started, and you were able to make it eastward or northward, then you or your children or your grandchildren today are stateless refugees in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. In Jordan, some of them have citizenship, but you're refugees. You're living in the West Bank, you're living wherever you are. If you were unlucky that day in 1948 and your car wouldn't stop and you were stuck, so to speak, in Haifa, then you and your children and your grandchildren, not your great-grandchildren, are all citizens of the state of Israel with all of the rights and benefits that come with that. But those rights and benefits, as significant and as real as they are not the whole story. There have been numerous incidences along Israel's history where there have been violent outbreaks between Israeli security and Israeli Arabs. You may be aware that Israeli Arabs were actually put under military authority. They were citizens of the state of Israel, but they were put under military authority. They had to get permission to move from town to town. They were tried in different courts. Different laws applied to them from 1948 to 1966. That's a very long time. It was the first, essentially, 2 decades of Israel's existence. That's ended, thank God, but it has left a very, very bitter feeling. You can understand why Ben-Gurion in 1948 didn't trust these people, because they were essentially the ones who hadn't been able to escape, and their loyalties were quite obvious. But the choices that he made were probably very damaging in the long run. In 1956, just as Israel was getting ready to go to war in the Sinai campaign, there was a curfew put on a whole area, which included Kfar Qasim, a small Israeli town. A number of people working in the fields didn't know about the curfew. Israeli soldiers killed 47 people who were completely innocent, just gunned them down, including women and children. It became a huge Supreme Court case. There were cases in 2000 with rioting, and of course, Israel's conquering of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 1967 is what essentially ignited the Palestinian national movement, which made things even more complicated for Israeli Arabs. So this has been a long-standing, simmering tension, which one can understand, because you need to understand that the way they tell the story of this place and the way I tell the story of this place as a Jew are very different. The story that Jews in Israel tell is we were people dispersed across the world and we came home to our ancestral homeland and built a thriving state. They don't tell that story, quite understandably. They tell a story about how we were living here for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, but more likely hundreds of years. And people from Europe came and took our land away, not accurate, but nonetheless, that's how they feel, and created a state not of our making. That's entirely true. So there are 2 very different narratives about what this place is that are at play here, and sometimes they explode in this kind of horrible violence. Just note that things were getting much better. During COVID, Israeli Jews who knew they might have to go to the hospital knew that if they ended up in the emergency room sick, the likelihood that an Arab doctor, nurse, tech, or someone else would be caring for them was very high. And there was a tremendous sense of cohesion and unity here during COVID, which was really wonderful to see. The Abraham Accords seemed to suggest that the Israeli-Arab conflict was simmering down, and that made it more comfortable for Israeli Arabs. They're getting, as I said before, more involved in the political process. Bibi was really wooing Mansour Abbas of the Ra'am party and so on and so forth. But now it's really all been burned to the ground. And I would say that we do know how the conflict in Gaza is going to end. It is going to end with Hamas asking for a ceasefire. It could be today, it could be next week, it could be in 2 weeks. Eventually there's going to be a ceasefire. We will have done horrific damage to their infrastructure, which they deserve. They will have killed a number of Israelis and wounded many more, and lots of Israeli children will live with PTSD for a very long time. It's horrible on both sides, but we know how the conflict is going to end. Unless, as I said, Hezbollah gets involved, which is a different story. What we don't know is how this very, very tragic situation with Israeli Arabs is going to end. This could really spin out of control. This could upend a sense that we were moving towards even more coexistence and more unity over the past decades, and really restore us back to where we were many decades ago. I hope and pray that that will not be the case. I hope and pray that the horrible violence inside Israel that we're seeing will actually lead leaders on both sides. And it's important to note, by the way, that both Arab leaders and Jewish leaders on the far right have all been decrying the violence unanimously. So that at least is good news. But I hope and pray that these leaders will be able to get things back under control, that they'll be able to bring their various populations back to quiet, and that we as a society, Jews and Arabs alike, will understand how much more work we have to do to make Israeli Arabs and Jews understand that we actually share a society that we're going to share as far as the eye can see. So I wish you all good health in what I know are still very trying times in Canada in general and in Toronto in particular. And I wish all of us who care and love about the Jewish state peace as soon as we can have it, and calm inside Israel, and an opportunity to begin to rebuild the ideal society that has always been the dream of Zionism, and for which all of us on both sides of the ocean continue to work with such great dedication.
Everyone, it's an honor for me to be here. It's unfortunate that those are the circumstances of meeting. I'm living here. I'm on a kibbutz called Beit Guvrin. I live on a hill, and the view in front of me is the shore, pretty much between the Gaza Strip and the town of Ashdod. And literally, while I was hearing, the speakers before me, I can see right now. I can see the Iron Dome going up and different missiles coming down. Every once in a while, the house is shaking, the windows are shaking. And that's pretty much our reality in the last few days. What I want to do in the next few minutes, I would like to walk you through the chronology of some of the events that happened in the last 2 weeks to try and kind of perhaps simplicate in a way what led us to this point. About 2 weeks ago, we started to see a scene in East Jerusalem where youngsters, East Jerusalemite Palestinians, as Ramadan, nights of Ramadan were coming in, going over to ultra-Orthodox, religious-looking Israelis, hitting them and filming it and putting it up on TikTok. And that became viral, and it became a trend. And following that, or the outcome of that, the police decided to block the route or the stairs near what's known as the Damascus Gate. What we had over there was a lot of youngsters sitting on the stairs and preventing people from passing by. So they just put those kind of bars to prevent that. And that triggered riots. And on those riots, we saw those youngsters, between the ages of 16, 17 to 24, 25, yelling statements as, remove those bars, free Palestine, death to the Jews, and so on. That triggered also several extreme Jewish groups known as La Familia and Lava to come out there and a few hundred meters away to start yelling death to the Arabs and all sort of terrible cries out. Hamas, while all that was happening, launched several missiles down on the Gaza perimeter. And while that was happening, Egypt came into action and demanded from Hamas to stop the shooting. And Hamas pretty much said to Egypt, no problem, we will stop the shooting. You just make sure that the elections, the Palestinian elections, are going to happen. Egypt, like Israel, like Jordan, like Fatah itself, had no interest of those elections happening, simply because it was obvious to everyone that if the elections would happen in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, and in the Gaza Strip, Hamas is going to win for several reasons. And the elections were canceled. And the riots kept on going. By the way, the bars were removed. The riots kept on going. And when you ask those youngsters, why are you rioting? I mean, those bars that you demanded to be removed were removed. You heard those youngsters talking about the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. I don't want to go too deeply into what is Sheikh Jarrah, but in a nutshell, Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And the story there generally is that prior to 48, there were houses over there, properties that were owned by Jews. In 1948, like any other place that was taken by Jordan, those Jews had to leave, similar to the story of the Jewish Quarter. And in 1967, when Israel took over the neighborhood, in fact, they could reclaim those houses. But in those houses already were living Palestinians, Arabs, that were actually living before 48 in neighborhoods in West Jerusalem. So those Palestinians were demanded, since they don't own the house, to pay rent. They refused to pay rent because they rightly said, well, we're not going to get rent from the houses that we left in 48. Why should we pay rent for those houses of Jews that left in a similar time? But that led to the Supreme Court of Israel to allow an evacuation of those houses. Now, it's a long discussion about, how does the Supreme Court work and about issues of law, but the way that Palestinians see it is an attempt to change the demography and the character of those neighborhoods. Sheikh Jarrah specifically is right almost on the border, right near route number 1, which means that if that becomes more of a Jewish neighborhood, the West just started moving east, and if that stays in the hand of Palestinians, the Arabs, the Palestinians, the East is claiming that area. So it's way bigger than just a neighborhood. And that triggered really things that have to do with identity, with history, 48 and 67. While all that was happening and riots kept on going, we saw an escalation from Gaza, and the missiles started coming down, as Danny already said before. And Hamas generally, very fast, did manage to get this visual victory, simply because if you're looking at what happened in the Arab media, also in the Israeli media, also in the Western media for the past 10 years, parallel to the Arab Spring, the Palestinian story was actually removed from the agenda, which obviously allowed us to go ahead with the Abraham Accords. And what happened very fast, in this past week, Hamas did manage to bring up the Palestinian story to the front page. Here we are talking about it. But not only that, if the elections were canceled and Hamas was left out, Hamas is able to say right now, you canceled the elections, but guess what? Go and check right now any media source, an Israeli one, an Arab one, which is important to check, and a Western one. It'll be hard for you to find the words Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, or Fatah. You will hear Hamas. Hamas did manage in a few days to bring the Palestinian cause to the table and bring themselves back to be the most relevant player in the field. But at the end of the day, in order to prevent the ongoing violence, we will have to discuss it with Hamas and not with Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas. Like Danny said, if you check what's now concerning a lot of Israelis, it's what's happening inside. What's happening in Akko, what's happening in Lod, what's happening pretty much everywhere. If you're familiar with the geography of Israel, we are not driving right now south. Towns of Arad, towns of Dimona, Beersheba, those roads, Jews cannot drive through them. Those of you who've been to Akko and know the fish restaurants of Uri Buri, it was burned down, including his hotel. And I could go on with a long, long list. And that is of a lot of concern, as we don't know where that is going. As for the future, meaning the next few days, the future is for the prophets, and it's hard to tell. Yet, a few things that we need to take into consideration. One of the things that Hamas sees and understands as a tool of unity in the Arab world and on the Palestinian street is Al-Aqsa, is Jerusalem. The moment they play the ticket and the card of Jerusalem, that is a unifying ticket that brings together people from the West Bank, which are relatively out of the riots right now. There are similar events over there, but relatively things are quiet. Definitely among the Israeli Arab Palestinians, Jerusalem triggers a lot of emotions. And the fear is that tomorrow is a Friday, and we already know that Hamas is investing a lot of efforts in order to bring Al-Aqsa, the prayers tomorrow, to the attention of people, to incite people over there before, after, during prayers to come out, and we are expecting serious riots over there. And if that will happen, which it might, again, Jerusalem will be there. And once you say Jerusalem, once you say Al-Aqsa, you're really uniting the Arab world around it. The day after tomorrow, on Saturday, is Nakba Day, a day of commemoration, nothing to do with those events. Every year, what we celebrate as independence, they celebrate as destruction, and that's happening on this Saturday. And on Sunday, we have Shavuot, our festival of pilgrimage up to Jerusalem, which all of that combined together is a good reason to be worried for the next few days. I want to wish all of us, you in Canada, we here in Israel, days of quiet, days of peace, and hopefully we can all meet back here in Israel soon on missions, on trips, and enjoy the beautiful scenery and talk about all those events of something that happened in the past, and be able to talk about how do we heal all the damage that's happening these days. So thank you very much.
Dear friends sitting in Toronto, hi, my name is William. I work for UJA here in Tel Aviv, Israel. Last few days have been horrible, filled with fear, frustration, terror, and tragedy. We've been suffering thousands of rocket attacks on our cities throughout the last 72 hours, and in some areas of Israel for over 20 years or so. These last days have been specifically tragic due to the casualties, but also living under terror. Me, myself, a father of 3, found myself very frequently running into the stairwell in order to find shelter, or having to travel north from where we live in Tel Aviv in order to look for a safe room. In addition, we are all struggling now with some tensions within Israeli society, which broke out from tensions that were only on a social level to actual violence and lynching in the streets. Needless to say that this only adds another layer of fear and terror to the overall fear and terror that we all feel from the general security situation. That being said, and with all the hardships put aside, we are extremely grateful and appreciative to have our brothers and sisters in Toronto thinking of us, sending their prayers, and supporting us through the important work that UJA leads in Israel that allows people to get emotional but also physical relief due to these difficult times. So we want to take this opportunity to thank you for being with us in good times, but also now during the bad times, and to say how much we love you all and wishing you all a Chag Shavuot Sameach, and mostly peace and good health to everyone. Shalom.
Hi, this video is coming to you from Caesarea, Israel. Our family moved here this year, and we, thank God, are living in the north of the country, and there has not been so much action here, so we are okay. I think the hard part is for people that are in the south and the soldiers that are taking care of us. And I'm not gonna lie, this morning when I put my kids on the bus to school, it was definitely, my heart skipped a beat a little bit, but life goes on, and I'm really grateful to be here and to have the Israeli army supporting us and taking care of the country. And
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Hi everyone, our friend in Toronto, the Federation of Toronto. I stand here in the emergency center after 72 hours of attack from Gaza. The Hamas and the Jihad threw 1,000 of rockets to all the area. And last evening we have a bad evening. Some of the children of the road died from one rocket that hit the house that he stayed. You know that in the last 10 years together we bring the resilience for the people in Sderot. With your friendship, we create a lot of projects that help us to make Sderot stronger, to make Sderot a place that people want to come and want to live. And I want to say to you again, thank you very much about all your support, and especially in this time we need you to continue to work, to give back the resilience for the citizen of Sderot. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, this is Kate. Normally you would find me in Toronto as I work for UJA Federation. Currently I'm visiting my parents in Israel together with my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old and my husband. In the last few days we've spent lengthy hours in the bomb shelter room, and we just wanted to say, yeah, we're hoping for the better times, and thank you so much for your support and for standing with Israel. This is an honor being part of this community.
Hi, we're the Orzys and have lived in Tel Aviv for 3 years since making Aliyah. On Tuesday night, we were out for dinner with friends when the first missiles hit.
This is very real for us now. You know, we used to sit in Toronto and we would imagine what it would be like to be bombed in Toronto from Burlington, because it's about the same distance, maybe Niagara Falls. And we would say Canadians would never stand for it, which of course they wouldn't. But when your house is shaking, literally shaking, and 30 missiles are exploding around you in the space of 5 minutes, and you can't see what's going on because you're in your safe room or your bunker, believe me, everyone at that point wants the IDF to make it stop.
Thank you for your friendship and your support.
My name is Rachel Nave, and I work on the team representing UJA Federation of Greater Toronto here in Israel. I'm originally from Toronto, so I know firsthand how amazing the community is. UJA support has been here since day one, and it continues, and it's felt throughout the country. We right now are going through a very horrible situation, and nobody really is spared here. All of our partnership communities, not just what we're used to in Sderot, who have dealt with continuous rocket attacks for the past 20 years. Now it's in all of our partnership communities, including Bat Yam, Eilat, Eilot, and all over the country. We're hoping to get back to a routine quickly, but we wanted to say thank you so much for the continued support and for rallying behind us. So from our family to yours, thank you.
Hi to the very dear Toronto community. This is Eyal Shmueli, the Director of Major Gifts, the Israeli Shaliach to Toronto. Currently, for over 1 year, I'm here in Israel. We came because of COVID. Right now we're living in a small kibbutz in the northern Galilee called Tuval. Right now it's a little bit after midnight here, and we mobilized a few volunteers here in the kibbutz to do patrols around the kibbutz. We are all surrounded by Arab villages, which we're good friends with every day, but right now things are a little bit hectic, so we're just patrolling the kibbutz, making sure everyone is safe, making sure our children is safe, and hopefully it will be another peaceful night. I'm sending you all my love and thank you for all of the support, and only peace to us all. Bye-bye.
We are fortunate now to be joined in Toronto by wonderful rabbinic leaders reflecting the broad spectrum of Jewish practice. I'd now like to ask, in order, Rabbi Daniel Korobkin, Rabbi Yael Splansky, and Rabbi Aaron Flansreich to address the rally.
Thank you. Thank you to UJA for all of the wonderful work that you're doing to support Israel, especially during this time. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for supporting UJA and enabling us to be able to do this important work. A synagogue burns in Lod. A 6-year-old child is killed by a rocket in Sderot. An 87-year-old woman dies after running to a shelter, falling and hitting her head. We're going to recite a paragraph of Tehillim, a paragraph of Psalms. Psalm 130, out of the depths I call you, O Lord. This has become a very popular psalm to recite when we, the Jewish people, are in times of trouble. We call out of the depths a song of ascent, because sometimes it feels we have no place to go but up. One particularly poetic line of this psalm is this: Nafshi ladoshem mishomerim laboker, shomerim laboker. I am more eager for the Lord than watchmen for the morning. Watchmen for the morning. Why is that phrase, shomerim laboker, watchmen for the morning, repeated? The Rashi commentary explains that it represents a person who is waiting for morning to come. Many times we greatly anticipate that something great will happen, and just when we think we are on the precipice of seeing light, we discover that the light we thought we saw was merely an artificial light, perhaps from a passing car, but that morning is very far off. And so we go back to waiting again, shomerim laboker. And this is the role of the Jew in this world. We go through iterations of history where we think we are at the point when morning has arrived, when peace has arrived, only to have those hopes dashed with a new iteration of violence and hatred. What do? We go back to becoming shomerim laboker. We never give up, and we will continue to wait until the properly allotted time for morning to come. Another interpretation is from Ibn Ezra, who says that the funny thing about being a night watchman is that when your allotted shift is at night, you know for sure that at some point it will come to an end, because morning always comes. Even when you're tired and weary from spending all this time, all night during your security watch, and your eyelids become heavy, you reassure yourself by saying, don't worry, morning will soon be here. The doubling of the phrase is the watchman himself reassuring himself, saying, morning will come, morning will come. This is in itself helps us to persevere and stay awake during the long night. We have come so far, and we have seen so many glimmers of light, and we find ourselves once again thrust into darkness. But we can be assured that no matter how dark it is for our people, morning will soon be coming. It is so close we can taste it, and we hope and pray that this current spate of violence and hatred is very temporary, and that we will face the brightness and warmth of the morning soon once again. May the Lord watch over and keep the people of Israel. Shir hama'alos mima'amakim kirasicha Adonai. Adonai shim'a v'koli tihyano oznecha kashuvos l'kol tachanunoi. Im avonos tishmor Adonai miya'amod. Ki imecha selicha l'ma'an tivarei. Ki visi Adonai kivesa nafshi v'lidvaro hochalti. Nafshi l'Adonai mishomerim laboker. Shomerim laboker. Yachel Yisrael el Adonai. Ki im Adonai hachesed ve'harve imo fidus. V'hu yiftes Yisrael mikol avonosav. Thank you.
Libi b'mizrach, our hearts are in the east. We all have someone in Israel. Family, friends, a colleague, a former shinshin, a teacher, an old camp counselor, or a favorite tour guide. Each of us knows someone who is now sitting in a shelter or taking cover in a stairwell. I hope you are in touch with them one way or another. And if you haven't yet reached out, now is the time. In addition to the critical action items Adam Minsky named for us, I would add that we also send a simple note to someone we may have lost touch with over time, just a simple note to say, I'm thinking of you. I remember you. I'm praying for you. We held a rally for you in Toronto and thousands of people came. From the blessed quiet of our Toronto homes in lockdown, we cannot protect our Israeli sisters and brothers from the trauma of sirens wailing, but we can protect them from the deafening silence of isolation from the world by reaching out. And although we cannot protect them from rocket fire, God knows we would if we could, we can each do our part to protect them from the assault of lies and ignorance lobbed against Israel's Shem Tov. The psalmist knew what it was to live in fear of enemies, seen and unseen, known and unknown. The psalmist took shelter in God's protection. From Psalm 91, Yoshev beseter elyon betzel Shaddai yitlonan, Omar ladonai machsi umitzudati, Elohai evtach bo. Dwelling in the shelter of the Most High, taking cover in the shadow of the Almighty, I say of the Eternal One, you are my refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I trust. In turn, the Eternal God says, because you desire me, I will deliver you. I will lift you up because you know my name. When you call me, I will answer. I will be with you in time of trouble. I will strengthen you and honor you. I will satisfy you with length of days. I will reveal to you my saving power. Not as a political analyst or historian, not as a military strategist or a legal expert in land rights, but as a rabbi, I hope we will make room for expansive prayer now. Our opinions may be focused, our arguments may be exacting, our loyalty and love for Israel is absolutely unwavering, and we can be expansive in our prayers. A new poem on this theme by Rabbi Jordan Bronig. It is possible to pray for peace. Our prayer life need not know our boundaries, no green lines, no dashes, no subtle demarcations. Our longings can transcend our political ideologies, cut across our keen analyses. Earnestness, cast out of our public discourse, still has a place in the language of our hearts. We have the capacity to pray for the old couple crouched in their stairwell in Ashkelon and the terrified child in his pajamas in Gaza. We can spread our prayer like a tattered shawl, like a billowing canopy, like a sparkling firmament over the tired soldiers, the tired shoulders of these, and across the narrow frames of those. We are not naive, not cowards, not traitors to pray for peace. We are told to get in line only to stand with them or stand with the other, but we can pray to a Holy One who resides in the space between, diminished by their missiles, laid low by their rockets, exhausted, but still listening for our prayers. Sorry, Rabbi, you are on mute. Could the UJA host please unmute the Rabbi?
I want to thank the leadership of the UJA Federation and, of course, the many, many hundreds, if not thousands of people who have tuned in for this rally on behalf of Israel after watching what seems to be countless hours of heart-wrenching and painful news reports coming out of Israel with the lives of people who are being threatened, homes are being burnt, and the general upheaval of a remarkable flourishing moment in Israel that we took so much comfort and strength from. The thing about Toronto is this, and I've had the good fortune of being here now almost 30 years, is that when the state of Israel is under attack, each of us feel as though we're under attack too. The ties between Toronto and Canadian Jewry and the state of Israel is enormously emotional and tight and close. The state of Israel represents for us the state of the people of Israel in many, many ways. And so this is a difficult moment for us all. I've been asked on behalf of the Federation to recite a prayer on behalf of the state of Israel. And as I sat down to look at the prayer before I will recite it with you, a story by the philosopher Jean Amery, who wrote a book called At the Mind's End, came to my mind. Amery survived the Second World War, but he underwent terrible trials and tribulations and torture by the Gestapo. He recounts the following moment in his life. He was wandering in a war-torn, bombed-out village towards the end of the war. He had left Germany far behind where he had been born, wandered from France and then to Belgium. And then someone asked him where he was from, where was his home? And he could only say to that person, I have no home. And the person said to him, well, where will you go? And Amery answered him by saying, wherever it is the place that I can have the most home. Our hearts live in two places, firmly here in Toronto. And yet for us to have the most home, as Rabbi Splansky said, our hearts always turn east. We pray for peace. We pray for tranquility. We pray that God should strengthen the hands and the hearts of the people who defend our Holy Land. But we also pray that when this is over, and it will be, that our hearts will be tender too. Please join me in this prayer on behalf of the state of Israel. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzor Yisrael v'go'alo, Orechet Medinat Yisrael Reshit Smichat Gu'elatenu, Hagen Aleha be'avrat chazdecha, Ufaros Aleha Sukat Shilomecha, Ushlach Oracha va'amitcha l'rasheha, Sareha v'yoatzeha, V'takneim be'itzat tova milfanecha, Chazek et yedei mignei eretz kadeshenu, V'hanchilem Elohinu Yeshua, Va'ateret nitzachon ta'atreim, V'natata shalom ba'aretz, V'simchat olam yoshveha, V'nomar, Amen. Our Father in heaven, Rock and Redeemer of the people of Israel, bless the state of Israel with the beginning of its redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. We ask that you guide its leaders and advisors with light and truth. Help them with your good counsel. We ask that you strengthen the hands of those who defend our Holy Land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy and peace. And let us all say, Amen.
Thank you, rabbis, for those moving words. We'd now like to conclude tonight's rally with Ariel Oziel performing the Israeli national anthem Hatikva. If possible, please rise.
Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homiya ulafate mizrach kadima Ayin leTzion Sophia Od lo avda תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים.
This now concludes our rally. I want to thank each of you who joined us tonight. Between Facebook, YouTube, and the live Zoom, we're over 8,000 strong. It's truly incredible to see my screen filled with so many faces from across our community. In the coming days, I encourage you to keep an eye on your email inbox and social media, as we'll be sharing more ways that we can make a difference for the people of Israel in this time of crisis. Thank you. May God protect the people of Israel. Am Yisrael Chai, and good night.